Fret leveling forensics. The very first thing we have to do is check to see that our fretboard or neck is flat or can be made flat. We check it first with the strings on. In this case, I know I have some relief. In other cases, quite rare, you might find that you're getting a weird read off the heel. That means you might have one of those very rare heel ramps, in which case you're going to need a shorter notched ruler. So I made this using a laser machine, and with a shorter notch ruler you avoid the heel area and see that the truss rod adjustable area here can be made flat. So next we look at it with strings off. So now, strings off, different guitar. This is the guitar we're working on today. I like to use the flashlight and see what daylight I can see underneath here. Okay. Now I know this neck is already flat because I've already straightened it out. There has been some commentary about fretboards not being even, and there's some truth to that in that finger wear. Okay. So if you look underneath here and you see something like this between the frets on the wood, that's a really well played guitar, and you got a little wear in between the frets. However, that wear does not land within 1/8 of an inch of a fret because the strings come off the frets at an angle, and so there's really no way that that string is going to get right up into the crease where the fret joins the wood. So the finger wear is going to be like in the middle. With FretMaestro, that is not a problem because we only use 1/8 of an inch on either side of the fret. So any finger wear isn't going to influence this. And in that very rare case, I've seen photographs of it. I've actually never seen it in real life where finger wear is right up next to the fret. I just really don't know how that happened. I think those were probably doctored photographs. But if that were to happen, the radius of FretMaestro follows the radius of the fretboard. So even if you have some high and low spots in here, you still have the high spots and you still have the outside edges. The radius of FretMaestro will still follow a true radius of the fretboard. So the finger wear is not a problem. Over time, a fretboard can get some deformation, particularly like finger wear, or if it's abused, weather wear. And then there are other cases some people talk about that just aren't real. For example, we're looking at divots on the 2nd and 13th frets. What we see here is this dipping down at the fret. This is also on the 13th fret. Yeah, that's pretty much not going to happen. The next thing we'll see is the divot between the 10th and the 11th frets. It's finger wear, and it's a non-issue for FretMaestro. That's a little bit exaggerated, but that's the point. We'll also notice it does not reach the fret, and it really doesn't. And that's going to leave at least 1/8 of an inch for the FretMaestro to ride on. The strings come down at an angle off the fret, so it's not going to be right next to the fret when you see finger wear. The next thing you look at is what about a bump here between the 11th and the 12th? Is that a bump on the wood? Not likely. It's probably blistering of the varnish or the lacquer, and you just flat scrape that off with a razor. No big deal. Another possibility is a slot swell, also slot shrinkage, 6th and 7th frets. Here we see the slot is swelling. That's from humidity. Here we see that the slot is shrunk back, and that's from being dehydrated. In this case here, in number 6, the swelling is pushing the fret up. In number 7, where the slot is shrunk, the fret can lift up. This is fretboard repair. This is not fret leveling. You need to repair the fretboard before you do any leveling, because all you're going to do is put good money after bad if you don't handle this first. Typically, the finger wear does not come any closer than 1/8 inch to a fret, like we see here. Now, this is the Omni Pro. And what we're looking at here, we see that there's 1/8 inch there. So you can definitely use the Omni Pro. In the very, very, very rare case where the finger wear goes right up next to the fret, as we're seeing it's doing here underneath the FretMaestro, you can see that the FretMaestro radius bridges that. And so you can use FretMaestro in that case as well, but it would have to be the radius version. As long as there is some footing here in between the finger wear and on the edges, FretMaestro will follow the radius of the fretboard and you will get the perfect fret as a result. To do fret forensics, we need a worksheet, and you can download this worksheet at SixStringers.com how-to. It's an 8.5 by 14 legal size paper that you can shrink down if you need to. In this example, I filled out a worksheet, and it basically represents new frets or a new guitar, frets that have not been subjected to old school leveling tools and rules. Fret wire tolerance is plus or minus 0.02 of an inch. In this case, we only have a 0.02 inch variance, so we're not going to want to use a sanding beam on this. We want to straighten out these variances here that we see, but not with a freehand file, because there's no way to make them all the same that way. So we're going to use FretMaestro, which is the only way to symmetrically perfect these frets to make possible the optimized guitar setup to get the very best play and intonation any guitar has to offer. It will take about an hour to maestro these frets. This is a guitar that a customer had. It was a new guitar, it's an expensive guitar, that was CNC fret leveled at the factory. Now all the frets are the same, but every fret is 0.03 asymmetrical. So we see here that it's high on the low E side, low on the high E side, and here at the middle of the fret falls in between. So 54.5 53,000, and 51.5. So the difference between 54.5 and 51.5 is 0.03. I'm not going to concern myself how this happened using a CNC machine. Have a pretty good idea, but we'll leave it there. We corrected this with FretMaestro in about an hour. One of the things you have to be aware of are called fulcrum frets. In this example, we have the blue fret is the fulcrum fret. Now in any case, a sanding beam cannot balance on a single fret. And in this case, the beam is level across space and we have a 0.06 gap between the fulcrum and all other frets. So what happens is the beam must tilt down to the magenta fret. In this case, it's also 06 degrees from the magenta fret to the blue fret. We see progressively greater space between the beam and the frets. And that's exactly how that's going to sand it down too. So that's no good. There has to be a solution for that. An example of ignoring the fulcrum fret is the guitar we're working on today. There's a fulcrum fret here at the 12th, 58.5, taller than all other frets on the fretboard. The shortest fret is 52 thousandths. That is a 6.5 thousandths difference. And we also look and see that the free filing work, as evidenced by 6, 7, and 11, is not so great. Looking at number 7, for example, we have 56 thousandths and 52.5 thousandths. That's a 3.5 thousandths variance. Now we need to correct this. And to do that, we're going to introduce an innovative way to use a sanding beam. The Fret Forensic worksheet gave the real story on what was going on with the frets here. You definitely need a digital gauge to get that information. You cannot use a fret rocker. It has no readout. All it does is rock on a high fret between two other lower frets, and that doesn't mean that left and the right of the center are the same height. It just means the one in the middle is higher. It's not accurate at all. So we found out that we have a fulcrum fret that is 6.5 thousandths taller than all of the frets. That's a lot of filing. In addition to that, I had divots in these frets. And those divots are about 5 or 6 thousandths deep. So say it was 5 thousandths. 5 thousandths plus 6.5 thousandths is 11.5, 12 thousandths. That is a lot of filing. I don't want to use FretMaestro to do that much filing. And so I decided to come up with a way to use sanding beams. I know I said I would never use a sanding beam. But I actually figured out how to make them accurate. I made these myself. They're made out of MDF, 3/4 inches thick, 2 layers, 1.5 inch, 1 inch wide. Now, when you have the MDF, you face them off like this to see if there's any daylight in between. You flip them around and you're looking to see if there's any daylight. If you see daylight, you face those two sides together and glue them. That'll flatten it out. Okay. Then, you don't have to, but I added phenolic plates on both sides because I figured to make it easier to peel the emery cloth off. And I do use emery cloth instead of the specialized sandpaper. It's a heck of a lot cheaper. It's far more durable. And, you know, I'm going to give you links to where you can find that, and also the tape to attach it with, and everything else actually, including the digital gauge and where the best price in the United States is. So to use these on a Fulcrum fret, as you already saw, it's going to seesaw. So we need a way, right? We need a way to make that not happen. And I came up with this method, which I call risers. I use this material here. This is PET film. It has a grid paper back, so it makes it easy to see where you're cutting, to be consistent. And so when I cut it, I fold it over, and that way I can cut 2 at a time. I also scribe the back of the paper so that it's easy to peel. And you can do the same thing. You make it 2.5 inches wide, get a straight edge, go along one edge, and scribe the back with a razor. Don't cut it all the way through. So, this material is 5/1000 of an inch, and so I really like that because it also now replaces the blue tape. The blue tape could compress, and this will not compress. And this is also a lot smoother. It's going to glide more. It's not going to wear from FretMaestro or anything else. And so to get the 58.5 thousandths, at 5 thousandths here, 11 times 5 is 55. I'm 3.5 thousandths short. But if I use 12, I'm 1.5 thousandths and 2 thousandths too tall, and that makes extra work. This is 2-phase tape. This is 1.5 thousandths. So 2 layers of that first, right up next to the fret, and make sure you don't have any lift in there. You want it right next to it with maybe a little space. 2 layers of this tape, and then 11 layers here. And you see I built it here, and I built it here. Now you can also add another one here to use a long beam. I don't have a long beam, so I'm doing this section first. Having made the reference frets, what you do there, I use FretMaestro. This had divots in it. I wanted to get this down to a finished fret. And whatever that is, I'm going to duplicate that over here. And I'm going to put a piece of Scotch tape over the top of the fret and mark it with a Sharpie. These become reference frets for the sanding beam. These become risers that make it possible for the beam not to rock. To give you an idea, I don't know how well you can see this, but I'll mark this right up along the edge here. I use the beam this way. Okay. Now I'm going to use, this is 150 on one side and 400 on the other is what I use. I might even use 100 in this case. And what you'll notice is that it takes that black mark off following the radius of the fretboard. So that's kind of cool. What it does not do is prevent the sanding beam from making the tops of the frets flat. So you sand it down until you scratch the top of the tape of the reference fret. You see that black mark scratching there. And now you're really close to finish it off with FretMaestro. It's pretty neat, pretty easy. And let me show you where to get this stuff and the best prices to get it. SixStringers.com homepage. We want to find the how-to page. One area is right here in the middle. The other area is up here on the right-hand toolbar. Simply click on it. At the how-to page, you scroll down, the Fret Forensic Worksheet download. And here I provided links to the best prices. I've done the shopping for you. For the digital gauge, belt center eraser, double-sided tape at 1.5 thousandths, emery cloth, the 1-inch tape for the emery cloth to use instead of sandpaper on the sanding beam. Scroll down a little further, and this text covers most of what we talked about in this video. Oh, by the way, here's that digital gauge. In the United States, the best price I found was $61.99. That's compared to $128.52 on the 24th of August 2024 for the exact same thing from you know who. So now we have the frets rough leveled using the sanding beam. I did make the tops of the frets flat because that's what sanding beams do. And when you have that happening, it leaves a sharp edge. And if you're going to use a radius file, we're going to be using FretMaestro. So let's see what we have to begin with. FretMaestro has a gauge which is used to identify the lowest fret, because that's what we need to get down to. And the numbers on this gauge correspond to the numbers on FretMaestro. So you have 0 through 11, that's 12 settings. Each setting is 3/1000ths of an inch, so it's very high precision. So we identify the lowest fret. Well, in this case, because we use the sanding beam, that's not what we're doing here. But let's say it was a new guitar and the frets were a little wonky, 2/1000ths left and right on each fret, and you really want to get the premium setup, so they need to be symmetrical and all the same. That's a pretty short job, and what we do is we find out what setting that is. So if this says number 4, what I do is I start with number 3 and then walk it in. And if I have to use number 4, I will. So that's the way to use the gauge. FretMaestro comes with 3 files. Each one is different. On the radius FretMaestro, each one is stamped with a radius number. So this is 12 and has a star next to it. That's the 150 grit diamond file. This one here is the radius stamp 12 again with the letter C. This is the V file, a crown narrowing file. It does not take off the top of the fret. It just narrows it, because when you knock your frets down, they get wider. And you may not like that for your kind of play and intonation. So this is to narrow that. This is the 300. And it simply says the radius. That's the 300 file, and that's for finishing. The Omni Pro, a little bit different. The Omni Pro does not have a radius. The Omni Pro, we designed that for conical radius frets. So in other words, each fret is a different radius up the fretboard. It's called a conical radius. A lot of people call that a compound radius, but it's actually conical, and the standard guitar is cylindrical, which is why it's 12 inches all the way, or 9.5, or whatever the case may be. This being a straight file, it follows the radius of the fretboard, and it manages to keep the radius of the fret to match that because of the depth of cut. And the files for the Omni Pro, because there's no radius, simply says 150 for 150 grit, 300 for 300 grit, and V for the V file, which is the crown narrowing file. By the way, you can use this on any guitar. It's not going to be as fast as a radius Maestro because you're not getting as much contact to the fret with a straight file that you do with the radius file. And then I include this nail. You may think that's insignificant, but you need a way to take the files out. So, the nail. Putting a file in, I need my glasses to see what I'm doing here. This is the 150 grit, the radius plus the star. You put the file in the slot. Let's say you want it at number 3. You turn the dial to number 3. Press in with your thumb. Rotate the dial. make sure it doesn't move. Now the file is seated. These numbers must match. If they don't match, that's going to be a problem. Okay? You don't want to do that. Okay, and then the nail takes the file out. All right. Now something else you may notice here, which is kind of interesting, is the shape of the dials. They look like guitar picks because they are. A unique guitar pick. We make wild plectrums. What's different about a wild plectrum? Several things actually. Has 4 different radiuses. Each one's going to give you a different tone on your guitar because the amount of the surface area that strikes the strings sets the vibration of the strings, hence the tone. And so you have your basic lead point here, a rhythm point there, a bass point here, and what I call grit and crunch right here. This particular material we call the Recording Artist series because it doesn't make any pick noise. So you might want to look at those, you know, on SixStringers.com. And we sell these on Reverb, and we also sell them on Etsy at SixStringers in both cases. All right, using FretMaestro. Oh, by the way, I have this because when we did the risers, I used that 2-phase tape, and it left behind quite a bit of gunk. This cleans it off really well and doesn't damage the finish of your fretboard. Isopropyl alcohol. All right, I know that I'm going to be using setting number 3, so I set it at number 3. Okay. And what I like to do, I got something stuck there. There it is. I've done quite a bit of these frets. This one here I haven't done. It's very flat in the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the glide strips. Remember this? Same material. And I'm going to put it on both sides of the fret. I'll move this guy out of the way. I'll leave a little bit of space between the glide strip and the fret so that the debris can fall into it. Not a very big space, just a little space will do it. These are a little bit longer, so they have tags on the ends. Makes it really easy to pull them off. Smooth it out. Now I'm going to mark the top of the fret with a Sharpie. And here's something a lot of people don't understand or know. Sanding bead made sharp edges. And that's not really friendly with a radius in this file. That sharp edge is going to try to cut into that file in a particular place, and that's going to shorten the life of the file. So I'm going to use the V file, and I'm just going to use a freehand here. I'm going to narrow the top of the fret and get rid of that sharp corner at the same time. And I'm not taking any of the height off because that's not what the V file does. It's a crown narrowing file. And you'll see that line became narrower and cleaner, and you can see what it's doing there. And that's also going to give less work for the radius file. Okay. Now I have a toothbrush here. Just brush out the debris. This is a belt sander eraser. I showed you the link to that. It's on the website, and it comes in like little rectangles, and you cut these into this size. Now when you cut these, you need to be really careful. This is really tough stuff. You have to put a block of wood over the top of it, maybe a 1/2 inch or an inch or whatever, and then use it as an edge for the knife so your fingers are out of the way, because if you slip cutting this with a knife and you're not using a block of wood, you're probably going to get stitches. So be very careful when you cut this. This is used to clean the file. Right? So I'm at number 3. And I can definitely feel it cutting. You can feel it catch here and there, and you can hear the sound. Then we take a look at the black mark that we put on top of the fret and see where it's cutting. Okay. So far we're just taking and rounding out the top. Get the debris out. Clean the file. And you'll notice that as you use the file, it changes. The sound changes, the feel changes, and you'll know you're pushing debris. You don't want to be pushing debris. You need to clean the file again. Yeah. Yeah, that fret coming right along. Oh, I should point out there's a way to hold FretMaestro. You put your thumb like this. You don't want to put your thumb on a dial. You don't want to move that dial. And you put it in the heel of your palm, finger over like this, like that. That's the way to hold the FretMaestro. And the more on top of the fret you are, looking down on top, the easier it is to follow straight. And we're getting quite a bit of material off of here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to measure it with the digital gauge and see how even we are across the width of the fret. And we'll also know the height of the fret and compare that to what we have here in our finished reference frets. You can peel this off and move it to other frets. Nope, get that off of there. You have to set it on here and set it to 0. One moment, forgot the flashlight. Fifty thousandths. Got about a half a thousandths difference there. 49 and a half, 50. So I could do a little more maestroing to finish it off. Although a half a thousandth, 0.0005, isn't really going to ruin my day. That's how easy it is to use FretMaestro. And you go and you finish all the frets exactly the same. And if you have the digital gauge, you can double check to make sure you followed through. But here's the thing. If you don't follow through, I'll explain that. What has to happen is you have to bottom out FretMaestro to where it's not cutting anymore. Like I'm still cutting here a bit. And when you bottom it out and you do it with all of the frets, then you know they're all the same height, they're all the same perfect radius, and they're all the same beautiful crown. Okay, and if you don't, and you find out later that you have some higher frets or something, you didn't ruin your frets. It just means you have to go back and finish using the same settings. That's all it means. You're not going to ruin your frets. You just have to go back and finish. FretMaestro. Perfectly symmetrical frets, all the same height, all the same radius, all the perfect crown. There's no other way to do it other than, say, for example, a CNC machine, but then you have to send your guitar out and pay for that. You can do this at home by yourself. It doesn't require any special skills or experience. Just follow the instructions of this tutorial here and you're good to go. Some people want to change their fret radius to be different than that of the fretboard. So I have a couple of examples here. It's really easy with FretMaestro. In this case, somebody wants to change a 12-inch radius fret off a 12-inch radius fretboard into a 14-inch radius fret, which is going to make the fret flatter across the middle. And in doing that, what's going to happen is it's going to take down the middle. That's where it's going to file. And then it's finally going to come to a rest at the ends here. And the result is going to look like this. This would be the new radius, the magenta. So it's going to be flatter. And to do that, it's going to take off about 7/1000ths of an inch off the top of this middle of the fret. On the other hand, if you want to make the fret from 14 inches to 12, what's going to happen there is going to be a little bit different. Instead of taking it off the middle, it's going to take it off the ends. So on the first fret, it's going to take off like 4/1000ths. On the last fret, it's going to take like 7/1000ths off on the ends here. What's going to happen then, the result, is here. The blue line representing the new 12-inch radius on a 14-inch radius fretboard. So we're really taking off the ends of that 14-inch radius fret. And that's how easy it is with FretMaestro. Now let's see what we have here. We have our FretMaestro. Here we have a 6-inch steel ruler. The corners are very sharp in these, and that's important. I'll show you why. We have the ruler on level frets, and as we move it over, it should click on the 15th fret ever so slightly because it's not that much taller, but you'll feel the click on a kind of a nice sharp corner. Mark the top of this fret with a Sharpie, and then set the Maestro to like number 11, and go across it straight and even. Nice, straight and even, and get that Sharpie mark off evenly. And then check with the ruler again, make sure it doesn't click. If it doesn't click, it's level. And then all you do is go to the next fret, and then one, and then one, and then one, and then one, and we continue until they're all done. And what's going to happen is all of the frets are going to be perfectly level. Now the 22nd fret is going to be considerably shorter than the first fret. That's because we have an elevation in the heel. The point being that across the top of the frets, we are level, and that's what matters. FretMaestro versatility makes it easy. Our SixStringers store on Reverb is where we sell FretMaestro and wild plectrums. Here I'm showing you our 5-star ratings. All 5-star ratings. In the long term, last 6 months 100%, 12 months 98%, lifetime 99%. We also sell on Etsy. On Etsy, we are a star seller. And what that means is outstanding track record for providing great customer experience, consistently earning 5-star reviews, shipping orders on time, and replying quickly to any messages that we receive.